The night air was crisp, and the city lights glimmered like scattered jewels across the skyline. Zara tightened the strap of her worn-out backpack as she maneuvered through the bustling streets on her scooter, weaving between the chaotic traffic with practiced ease. The hum of engines, the occasional honk, and the distant murmur of people created a symphony she had grown used to. As a delivery girl, the city was her workplace, and every corner held stories, some mundane, some extraordinary. Tonight, she had no idea she was about to step into one of her own. Zara's phone buzzed, the notification alerting her to a high-priority delivery. She glanced at the address. It was a luxury hotel in the heart of the city, the kind she'd only ever seen in movies or driven past while imagining how the other half lived. The paycheck for this delivery was almost triple her usual rate. Must be one of those CEOs or celebrities, she muttered, brushing a stray strand of hair out of her face. Little did she know, her life was about to intertwine with one such CEO in a way she couldn't have predicted. On the other side of the city, Ethan Graves leaned against the wall of his opulent penthouse suite. The spacious room, adorned with sleek modern furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows, felt suffocating despite its grandeur. Ethan was the kind of man who exuded authority and confidence, yet tonight, his usual calm demeanor was nowhere to be seen. Beads of sweat glistened on his forehead as he loosened his tie, his breathing shallow and erratic. He clutched at his chest, a sharp pain radiating through him. His assistant, Claire, hovered nearby, frantically speaking into her phone. "The doctor isn't answering. What do we do?" Claire's voice was laced with panic. Ethan waved her off, his voice hoarse. "Find someone, anyone." His words were clipped, each one costing him effort. Meanwhile, Zara pulled up to the grand hotel entrance, her scooter looking comically out of place against the backdrop of luxury cars. She parked quickly, her sneakers squeaking on the polished marble floor as she stepped into the lobby. The receptionist glanced at her, eyebrows raised, but said nothing. Zara approached the desk confidently, holding up the delivery bag. "Delivery for Mr. Graves," she announced, her tone polite but firm. The receptionist's expression changed instantly, from mild disapproval to urgency. "You're just in time. Please follow me." Zara blinked in surprise. Usually, deliveries ended at the reception desk. She didn't expect to be escorted upstairs. Okay," she muttered, clutching the bag tighter as the elevator doors closed behind her. The ride was smooth and eerily silent, the kind that made her painfully aware of her scuffed sneakers and faded jacket. When the elevator dinged open, she was greeted by Claire, whose anxious eyes darted to Zara like she was a lifeline. "You're the delivery girl." Zara nodded slowly. "Yes, bud." "Good. Come with me. Quickly." Before she could protest, Zara was practically dragged into the penthouse. The sight that greeted her made her freeze. Ethan, pale and clearly unwell, sat slumped on the edge of a leather couch. His sharp features were softened by the vulnerability in his expression, his piercing blue eyes dull with pain. "What's going on?" Zara asked, her voice rising slightly as she set the delivery bag down. Claire's words tumbled out in a rush. "He's been poisoned, an allergic reaction to something he ate. The antidote is delayed, and the symptoms are worsening. You're here to help." Zara blinked, her heart pounding. "Help? I'm a delivery girl, not a doctor." Ethan's gaze finally locked onto hers, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. Despite his condition, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, curiosity, or perhaps something deeper. Zara felt an inexplicable pull, but she quickly shook it off. Claire gestured toward a small vial on the table. "You don't have to do anything extreme. Just he needs an antidote, and the compound requires immediate neutralization through a rare protein found in saliva. Zara stared, her cheeks flushing as the implication sank in. "You're joking." "I wish I were," Claire replied grimly. Ethan's voice, though faint, cut through the tension. "No one's forcing you. You can leave." Zara hesitated, torn between disbelief and a strange sense of duty. Every instinct screamed at her to walk away, yet something in Ethan's weary eyes made her pause. Was it desperation? Trust? Whatever it was, she found herself stepping closer, her pulse racing. "Fine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let's just get this over with." But as she leaned in, her mind a whirlwind of nerves, she couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this choice, would change everything. And Ethan, for all his agony, couldn't help but wonder if fate had just delivered more than a cure. Ethan's breathing steadied slightly, though his face still showed traces of discomfort. Zara, now seated across the room on the edge of a chair, avoided his gaze, feeling a strange mix of awkwardness and relief that the situation had calmed down. She fidgeted with the strap of her backpack, replaying the events in her mind. It wasn't exactly how she'd imagined ending her shift. "Thank you," Ethan said finally, his voice hoarse but steady. It wasn't just gratitude in his tone. It was something deeper, something Zara couldn't quite place. Zara looked up, startled. She hadn't expected him to speak so soon. You're welcome, I guess," she replied, her voice soft but edged with nervous energy. "But I'm still not sure what just happened. Who even keeps poison in their food?" Ethan let out a weak chuckle, his lips curving into a faint smile. "It wasn't poison exactly. It's complicated." Before Zara could press further, Claire re-entered the room, carrying a folder and looking more composed than before. "The doctors are on their way," she informed Ethan, then turned to Zara. "You've done more than enough. We'll arrange for someone to escort you home." "I'm fine," Zara said quickly, standing and grabbing her bag. "I can find my own way." She wasn't sure if she was more eager to leave because of the awkwardness or because she didn't want to get pulled into whatever this bizarre situation was. Ethan, now sitting upright and regaining some of his composure, spoke before she could turn to leave. "Wait." Zara froze, glancing at him cautiously. There was something about his voice, commanding yet gentle, that made it hard to ignore. "I didn't catch your name," he said. "Zara," she replied after a moment's hesitation. "Well, Zara," Ethan said, leaning back against the couch, "I owe you one." "You don't owe me anything," Zara said quickly, her voice firmer than she expected. "I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time." Ethan raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Maybe," he said, his tone light. "Or maybe it was the right place at the right time." Zara didn't respond, unsure of what to make of the man in front of her. His confident demeanor was returning, but beneath it she could still sense vulnerability. Shaking off the thought, she nodded and headed for the door. "Take care of yourself, Mr. Graves," she said over her shoulder, not looking back. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Zara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The events of the night felt surreal, like a strange dream she couldn't quite wake up from. Yet something about Ethan Graves lingered in her mind, much as she tried to push it away. Meanwhile, back in the penthouse, Ethan stared at the door long after Zara had left. There was something about her, a quiet strength, an unpolished authenticity, that he couldn't shake. He was used to people fawning over his wealth and power, but Zara had looked at him like he was just another human being. It was a rare feeling, one he wasn't sure how to process. Claire interrupted his thoughts. "Ethan, we need to talk." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Go on." "That incident tonight, it wasn't random. Claire said, her voice low. The food was tampered with. Ethan's eyes darkened. You're saying someone did this on purpose? Claire nodded grimly. We don't know who yet, but we'll find out. In the meantime, you need to be more careful. You've made a lot of enemies in business. Ethan leaned back, his mind racing. It wasn't the first time his cutthroat decisions had earned him enemies, but this felt personal. The thought that someone was targeting him didn't scare him as much as it should have. It angered him. And for some reason, he couldn't stop thinking about Zara and how she had been caught up in the chaos. Over the next few days, Zara tried to move on with her life. She kept busy with deliveries, but her thoughts kept drifting back to that night. She found herself wondering about Ethan, who he was, why someone would want to harm him, and why he had looked at her like she was more than just a delivery girl. Unbeknownst to her, Ethan hadn't forgotten her either. He had asked Claire to track down her information, not to invade her privacy, but because he felt he owed her more than a simple thank you. He also couldn't ignore the nagging thought that Zara might be in danger now, simply for having been in the wrong place at the wrong time. As Ethan delved deeper into the mystery of who had tampered with his food, the pieces of the puzzle started to come together. An old business rival, someone he had crossed years ago, had resurfaced. The rivalry had been bitter, and Ethan had thought it was behind him, but it was clear now that the wounds hadn't healed. What unsettled him most was the realization that this rival wasn't just targeting him. They were willing to hurt anyone close to him. One evening, as Zara finished a late delivery, she noticed a sleek black car parked outside her apartment building. She felt a twinge of unease as she walked past it, but the car didn't move. Shaking off her nerves, she climbed the stairs to her small apartment and locked the door behind her. But the feeling of being watched didn't leave her. Ethan's world and Zara's were colliding in ways neither of them could control. The deeper Ethan dug into the threats against him, the clearer it became that Zara wasn't just a bystander anymore. She was part of the story, whether she wanted to be or not. And as their paths crossed again, the stakes would only get higher. Zara couldn't shake the strange feeling that had settled over her since seeing the car outside her apartment. She checked the locks on her door twice before finally settling into bed, though sleep didn't come easily. Her mind was restless, replaying the events of that night with Ethan, and wondering why she couldn't seem to let it go. She didn't know much about him, but something about his gaze, his words, stuck with her. The next morning, she woke to an unexpected knock at her door. Peeking through the peephole, she saw a man in a suit holding an envelope. Hesitant but curious, Zara cracked the door open. "Can I help you?" "Miss Zara?" the man asked, his tone professional but not unkind. "This is for you." He handed her the envelope, nodded politely, and walked away before she could ask anything further. Zara opened it slowly, her heart pounding. Inside was a handwritten note. "Meet me at Café Lumière at noon. It's important. Ethan Graves." She stared at the note, her mind racing. Part of her wanted to ignore it. She'd done her part, helped him in a moment of need, and moved on. But another part, the one that had been unable to stop thinking about him, urged her to go. Against her better judgment, she found herself at the cafe an hour later, nervously scanning the room until she saw him sitting in a quiet corner. Ethan stood as she approached, his expression softening when their eyes met. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing for her to sit. Zara sat cautiously, unsure of what to expect. "You didn't have to track me down," she said. "If this is about that night, I already told you it was no big deal." Ethan shook his head. "It is a big deal, Zara. And it's not just about that night anymore." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I've uncovered who was behind the attempt on my life. It was an old rival, someone I thought I'd left in the past. But they've been watching me, and now—" He hesitated, his jaw tightening. Now they're watching you too. Zara's heart sank. What do you mean, watching me? Why would they care about me? Because you were there, Ethan said, his tone filled with regret. They saw you help me. And if they think you're important to me, he trailed off, his meaning clear. Zara felt a surge of anger and fear. This isn't my fight, she said firmly. I didn't ask to be dragged into your world. I know, Ethan said quietly. And I'm sorry, but I can't let anything happen to you. That's why I need you to trust me. Let me protect you. Zara wanted to argue, but the sincerity in his eyes made her pause. She saw the weight he carried, the guilt he felt for putting her in danger. Against her better judgment, she nodded. Fine, but this had better not turn my life upside down any more than it already has. Ethan managed a small smile. I'll do everything I can to make sure it doesn't. Over the next few days, Zara found herself swept into Ethan's world, a world of bodyguards, encrypted phones, and constant vigilance. She hated every second of it, but couldn't deny the strange connection growing between them. Ethan, for all his power and control, had moments of vulnerability that made her see him in a different light. And Zara's resilience and straightforward honesty intrigued Ethan in ways he hadn't felt in years. The climax came one night when the rival finally made their move. Zara and Ethan were at a charity gala, a public event Ethan had insisted on attending to send a message that he wouldn't be intimidated. Zara, uncomfortable in her borrowed gown and heels, stayed close to him, her eyes scanning the room nervously. The attack was sudden. A figure emerged from the shadows, a knife glinting in the dim light. Ethan moved without thinking, stepping in front of Zara as the blade came down. Chaos erupted as security swarmed the attacker, but Zara's focus was on Ethan, who staggered backward, clutching his side. Ethan, she cried, catching him before he could fall. It's nothing, he said through gritted teeth, though the pain in his eyes told a different story. Zara pressed her hands against the wound, desperate to stop the bleeding as the paramedics arrived. The next few hours were a blur of hospital corridors and tense waiting. When the doctor finally emerged with news that Ethan would make a full recovery, Zara felt a wave of relief, so strong it brought tears to her eyes. When she was finally allowed to see him, Ethan was propped up in bed, his usual sharpness dulled by exhaustion, but his smile worn when he saw her. You're still here, he said softly. Of course I'm still here, Zara replied, sitting beside him. You got stabbed because of me. Because of you? Ethan chuckled weakly. No, Zara. It was for you. There's a difference. She looked away, her heart pounding. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, Ethan said, his tone serious. Because I couldn't bear the thought of losing you. Zara met his gaze, and for the first time, she saw the depth of his feelings. It terrified her, but it also felt right. Slowly, she reached for his hand. You're impossible, you know that. Ethan smiled, his fingers curling around hers. I've been called worse. As the days passed, Zara stayed by his side, and their bond deepened. The rival was arrested, the danger subsided, and life began to return to normal. But for Zara and Ethan, normal had taken on a new meaning. Their worlds had collided in the most unexpected way, but somehow they fit together. Zara had found someone who saw her strength and worth, and Ethan had found someone who reminded him what it meant to be human. In the end, they both realized that sometimes the most unexpected moments can lead to the most extraordinary connections. And as they walked into the future together, they knew that no matter what challenges came their way, they'd face them side by side.